Good evening. I'm Alina Polyakova. I am the president and CEO of the Center for European Policy Analysis. Thank you. Appreciate that, Congressman. We are a think tank based in Washington, D.C., and I was just telling my esteemed guests here that we have been working for 20 years trying to raise the alarm about the threat that Russia poses to European security. And unfortunately, no one listened 20 years ago, but here we are. So everyone is listening now, and it is absolutely my greatest honor to have the pleasure of moderating this discussion with, I think, two people who don't need much introduction. The Speaker of the House Emerita, Congresswoman from California, Nancy Pelosi. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. And the Chairman of Ukraine's Parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, Ruslan Stefanchuk. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure. I'd like to note that the chairman will be speaking in Ukrainian with simultaneous translation, so please do pick up a translation device if you need it. Mr. Chairman, I'm actually going to start our discussion with you. The title of this conversation is Democratic Peace Revisited: The Role of Parliaments in War. You have been making rounds at various parliaments around Europe, making the case for support for Ukraine. Most recently, you were in France, where you addressed the French Parliament and you called for the recognition of Holodomor as a genocide. And you also, of course, called for more weapons for Ukraine. Can you tell us a bit more about the message you're trying to convey as you have these conversations and these speeches at various parliaments across Europe?
First of all, I would like to express my gratitude, deep gratitude, for being present at this panel with the honorable and distinguished Ms. Pelosi. This is my honor. And I would like to say that here we're with the extended parliamentary delegation, and we're here also to demonstrate to the whole world the unity of the Ukrainian authorities. Because in the face of war, in the face of challenges that we're currently facing, we're demonstrating to the whole world that Ukrainian government and Ukrainian parliament are united, and we represent not factions and groups, we represent the people of Ukraine. And therefore, I would like to thank everyone who is here with me on this important mission. Regarding the questions related to large international marathon, yes, we are in this diplomatic path of activities on the parliamentary level and, of course, on the presidential level and the government of Ukraine. And you know that this is a long marathon which had one of its parts during the visit of the president to France, to Brussels and London. And now we have the continuation of this in Munich. This is the work of the big Ukrainian team, and we are sending one and the same message, that Ukraine can and should win this war. Ukraine needs support. Ukraine needs technological weaponry. And we are addressing the whole world that we should not lose time, because otherwise we will lose our chance and opportunity. And this is the main message that we have today for the rest of the world. And if you allow me a couple of points that we are now communicating to our colleagues also here at the Munich conference. Question number one is weapons supply to Ukraine. Ukraine can win this war if we have contemporary technological weapon, and if we have it now, urgently. We say we need it yesterday, and when the question is when you need this weapon, we always say we needed it yesterday, because the time has passed, and we do want very much the decision of our colleagues to be as fast as their assurance and support of Ukraine. Second is that this is the question related question related to the web, and I want to quote Winston Churchill, who said, "Give us the toolkits, the instrument, and we will finish the job." So the same is true for Ukraine. We are asking for instruments. Air defense is one of them. Long-range missiles, another one. Tanks is another one. And planes, fighter planes is another one. And another block of issues that we raise with our colleagues is sanction policy. Soon we will see the 10th package of sanctions, and we are grateful to our partners for such activeness in the sanction policy. But if Russia still now has the economic possibility to wage war, it means the sanctions somewhere don't work, and our task now is to analyze where they fail and do our lessons learned, because sanctions can be sanctions only when you cannot bypass them through other countries or in other countries, and when the economic pain of this sanction will be felt and will bring aggression to stop the war. And in this sanction, I would also add the full isolation of Russian Federation, because Russian Federation is not the one who should be communicating to G7. This is not the country whose place would be in G20. She doesn't have a place in the Security Council, and she doesn't have a place in the Olympic Games in Paris 2024. Russia, as a virus, has to be contained and be in the quarantine. The third thing we're talking about is the compensation for the damages done to Ukraine, because this is part of justice. Justice being that for the damage, big damage that was incurred by Ukraine, Russia has to be accountable. And item 4 that we raise is that we have to call things as they are named. The war is war, and the country, terrorist country, is terrorist country without any euphemism or other forms, because this is only fair and this is only clear, and this has some legal implications as well. Also, we demand justice in terms of creating specialized criminal tribunal against Russian Federation, because she has to be accountable legally, not only in terms of being defeated on the front, but legal accountability in international institutions. She has to be acknowledged a criminal state and be punished for this. And the 6th item we're raising is the implementation of the peace formula proposed by President Zelensky. This is a universal formula which soon will not be a theorem, but rather an axiom. It will be accepted by the whole world and supported by the rest of the world, because this is the path to the speedy victory. And the last thing we're talking about is membership in EU and NATO. These are 2 big priorities. We have a candidate status for EU. Ukraine would like to start its progress into NATO membership, and we do hope very much for Vilnius summit. We want to get the invitation to NATO. We want to start the full-fledged negotiations. And the last thing I want to add at the end, I would like also to add that nowadays the whole world is telling us how they are proud of us. And I think it's time for Ukraine to say to the whole world how we are proud of the level of support and joint victory that we are seeing. So thank you for this invitation, and Slava Ukraini.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Of course, President Zelensky spoke here at the Munich Security Conference just yesterday, and he laid out a very similar agenda, but thank you for really pointing a fine and very specific point on what President Zelensky also said. Madam Speaker, if I may, so we just heard from the chairman about the conditions that Ukraine is seeking in Russia's brutal war against Ukraine's territorial sovereignty. And of course, the issue that we've all been talking about the last several days is Ukraine winning. And Mr. Chairman just said, we need to provide Ukraine everything it needs to be able to win. Are we providing Ukraine what it needs to win? And is that actually our policy in the United States?
Thank you very much for monitoring our conversation this evening. Oh, no. Thank you for monitoring our conversation, for sharing your background and your knowledge of this important subject. It's an honor to be with Speaker Stefanchuk, and I'll pick up where he left off. Salva Grani. You can all say that, you know. Okay? You ready? Usually this. Salva. In any event, what the speaker has laid out, we call him speaker. We've been calling him speaker for more than a year now. So, but in any event, as has been indicated, 1 year ago, the president of Ukraine came here, issued the warning that was there, challenged us by saying, you know, where is the security structure of the Western world and the free world? We're on the verge of a Russian initiation of hostilities. We need help. And then he went home, but it was a real clarion call, challenge to conscience. It was wonderful. And of course, within 24 hours, the Russians invaded. The U.S. was useful in terms of our intelligence, which was telling NATO, this is going to happen. We know that this is going to happen. But to get to this, so relating the list that the speaker gave us to a chronology, sometime right after that, we passed a bill, $12 billion, in the Congress to send there. Then we went to Kyiv. We had a delegation that went to Kyiv the first couple of days of May, where President Zelensky gave us, again, the agenda, some of the issues at that time, relating to 4 things, relating to military assistance, humanitarian assistance, economic assistance, and humanitarian assistance, enumerating how many people are in the country, outside, refugees outside, displaced within, and what the needs were, very specifically in terms of numbers and in terms of kind of weapons that were needed. We came back, and then that, within a few weeks, we passed a $40 billion package, 39 point something, I think, a package for Ukraine, in a very bipartisan way, Then following that, we had, in April, we had the seize and freeze. In May, we had Lend-Lease. Every few weeks, we had a different bill. So his first thing is the equipment. And that has changed over time. What we asked for, we came back in May and asked for, was a must-have list, and we did eventually get that, but then we have it more and more. Now we want the F-16s, and I fully support and I'm hopeful that that will happen. I don't see why we can't be training on them now, even if we don't have a full commitment to have them, because it will take a while to train. So that was the main part of the additional. Okay, secondly, we talked about sanctions. The sanctions are very important, but they have to work, as the speaker said. Part of the sanctions were, as I said, in the seize and freeze. We would seize the assets of the Russians, and we would freeze them, thaw them out later, to go to one of your further points, to rebuild Ukraine with Russian money, Then we talked about them as an aggressive terrorist nation, and we have legislation, one form or another, that we will pass in a bipartisan way. We've been working on it for a while, and we had working on the legalities and this or that. 4th point, war is war. Call it war. Well, I don't know how the Russians think they can get away with calling it anything else, but they do. And again, when we're talking about accountability, I'm not sure if this was 5 or within accountability. There's accountability for the individual acts of rape as a weapon of war, and kidnapping thousands of children and taking them to the far reaches. I think some of those children are closer to Alaska now than they were to Ukraine. They've taken them to, these are sins, crimes against humanity. those people should be held accountable. But I was told that there's nothing a Russian soldier does that he hasn't been given orders to do, which takes us to another level of a definition of a terrorist country, and that is aggressor nation, which means that the hierarchy of the government is held accountable for what happens in war. We can do ours in terms of behavior of individuals and the rest. The other aggressive, that's an act of the United Nations, so that's something that's going to take a little more work and a little more time. But whether it's again among those 4 things and that the 10 list were, humanitarian assistance has been vast coming from the United States. Germany is the 2nd largest contributor to the cause one way or another, but so many countries have been so generous in welcoming refugees, but there's plenty of humanitarian assistance that is needed within, and you all have made this clear to us along the way, whether they're displaced persons or people living in war zones and really don't have too many options, they need humanitarian assistance. The economic assistance is really important. They need money for the budget, they need money to pay the teachers, to pay those soldiers and the rest of that, and they need outside investment into Ukraine. They need outside investment even now, the outside and economic investment. And so we're hoping in our meetings along the way that we can be a source of it and encouraging that. So humanitarian, economic, weapons we talked about, and again, just the idea that these people have so much courage. They're fighting for democracy. I've been told that I should use different language. Last night at a meeting they said, if you want it to be appealing, you should say they're fighting for freedom. Now, I don't know, you tell me, that we're fighting for freedom and liberty, and that's something that resonates with everybody in the world, even if they're not definitely in favor of a democracy. Matter of discussion. But in any event, yes, to your question, yes, I believe the United States is living up to our, as our Vice President spoke so beautifully today, to our values and to the strategic necessity of our assisting Ukraine. And of course, we want to get those airplanes, we want the air power, and it remains to be seen, but hopefully on a front burner. I yield back.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Madam Speaker, and thank you so much for your leadership in the many years you have spent, of course, in the House of Representatives, ensuring that we had bipartisan support for Ukraine, and the many packages we passed through the U.S. Congress to ensure that that happens. May I just ask a follow-up question? Thank you for laying out the agenda that you're seeking to achieve together with Speaker Stefanchuk and with the Ukrainian people, because I do want to highlight that this is an agenda for the Ukrainian people. It's not for the Ukrainian government. Of course, it represents the Ukrainian people, really talking about the entire country. And this has, what you're laying out here, of course, has massive public support in Ukraine. President Zelensky has incredible support in Ukraine. But in the United States, we're seeing some of the poll numbers, right? We still have very strong bipartisan support. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we have very strong bipartisan support in the U.S. Congress, both in the Senate and in the House for Ukraine. We have enshrined that support in our budget for the year. But if we look across the public opinion, it is slipping. A lot of the public opinion numbers among both parties, though the drop is much more significant, of course, on the Republican side, it's slipping. And that's bringing up a lot of concern among my Ukrainian colleagues, many of whom are here today, also from the Ukrainian parliament, Ukrainian civil society, that Ukraine fatigue is seeping in to U.S. politics. How do you, speak to your constituencies to make the case for why the United States should continue to support Ukraine?
Well, let me respectfully not subscribe to that characterization of where the American people are. There may be people who don't want to spend money or this or that, whatever it might be. But overwhelmingly, the American people, they've taken Ukrainians into their homes. They've supported people who have supported these budgets all along. They are for victory. And again, I don't want to give any currency to any press reports that, oh, that's some weakening. It's the way it is. It is a message of success, a message of victory. Oh, they ask all kinds of questions. The press asks all kinds of questions. And we're like, why are you asking that? We're just going to win, baby. We're just going to stay in this until we win. And it's about democracy, freedom, liberty for the Ukrainian people, but for the world. And again, I think the Vice President laid it out very well today in terms of values and in terms of strategic necessity for us to hold the line on Putin. I do not fear that there is any weakening of support for the people of Ukraine, as you characterize it correctly, in all of this.
I think that's a very important message to hear from you and from other representatives of the U.S. government here, not just in Munich, but across Europe, because as someone that talks to our European allies and colleagues all the time, we do hear an anxiety about where the U.S. stands. There's a lot of concern about our elections, et cetera. So I think the more you can take that message home here as you're doing your tours, I think that's very, very important.
Well, may I just say, but one of the questions that was asked of the Vice President today is, well, you have an election coming up, so how are you going to sustain? That's almost 2 years away. We want this war to be won by then.
That's right.
And so what are we asking about a war, an election in 2024, November, when what we're talking about is winning as soon as possible?
That's right, this year. Speaker Stefanchuk, let me ask you, we know that Russia has already launched a massive new offensive in the Donbass. We've been talking about that here at the Munich Security Conference, of course, elsewhere. Ukraine has said that the Ukraine will prepare its own counteroffensive, of course, to win back its own sovereign territory. But does Ukraine have what it needs now to be able to take back territory? And if not, you've laid out exactly the kinds of systems. We've seen these lists before, the fighter jets, of course, we just had the Leopards. There's a huge lag in deliveries. You need those things now, not in a month from now, not in 3 months from now. And we have been delayed for all kinds of different reasons that I think you know better than anyone here. But does Ukraine have what it needs now, as Russia has already started its offensive and the brutality of the war continues? Does Ukraine have what it needs?
Thank you very much for this question, but with your permission, I would like to start with your first question that you asked to Nancy Pelosi. Regarding the fatigue about war in Ukraine. I know this narrative is supported very actively by Russian propaganda as well, but we have to be honest that even if there is fatigue, this is not because of war in Ukraine, but this is because Russia is waging war in Ukraine, and this will be just simply honest to say that. On top of this, when we are talking about fatigue, I was communicating a lot with the soldiers who are at the front line. One of the members of our parliament, by the way, he's always on the front line. He was liberating Mykolaiv. We can give it up to him. Roman Kostenko, the member of our parliament. And when I talk to soldiers, warriors like this, I ask them, do you have fatigue? They say, no, we don't have fatigue, and look at me with the tired eyes. And they don't have this fatigue because they are fighting on their own land, they're fighting for their families, they're fighting for their children, they're fighting for their future. And if you're asking whether Ukrainians have everything it takes to win, my answer is yes, because we have the spirit that can win over anything. But if you're asking me whether we have all it takes to win now? I would say it may happen if we receive everything that was promised now. And that is a very important narrative that we have to comprehend, that on the every other day of bureaucratic prolonging means more Ukrainian lives lost. People who, for the values of democracy, freedom and dignity are sacrificing the most precious what they have, their lives and their healths. And in our delegation we have lots of warriors who participated in this warfare, and they come out, stand out, and they say things to the general audience that make us remember that despite all of this chatting, there are real values, freedom and mutual support and standing for the right things. And I think this is the most precious that Ukraine can give to the rest of the world. We can rust off some of the values that could have been misinterpreted or interpreted differently, but now we know that all the countries that are helping us, and I would like to thank the people of the United States, I would like to thank President Biden, I would like to thank Congress for the powerful bipartisan support. I would like to thank the government of the United States for standing together, and that we have faith in our common victory. Whether Ukrainians have all it takes, yes, we do. Can we have more? Yes, we can. And what will happen as a result? The victory will come faster.
Follow-up question, and I will come back to you, Madam Speaker. Just one quick follow-up question for the chairman. I'm curious, and I think it'd be useful for everyone here to hear that when you're talking to your parliamentarian colleagues, whether it's in France or Germany, all over Europe, especially in Western Europe, I think it's important to know that Ukraine isn't just fighting for itself. Of course, first and foremost, Ukrainians are fighting for themselves. But this is not just Ukraine's war. This is a broader war, as you said, Madam Speaker, for freedom. And not just universal freedom, but Europe's freedom and Europe's security and our freedom in the United States too, because our freedom is tied to Europe being whole, free, and in peace, and Europe will never be that as long as Ukraine is not whole, free, and in peace. But when you talk to your counterparts in France and Germany, do you hear them say, this is our war too, or not?
You know, this situation has drastically changed in the course of this year. When we started initially only with the words of support to Ukraine. Now, whenever I go to any parliament of Europe or any other country of the world, we feel that the majority of the members of the parliament feel this pain and this war as their own pain and their own war. And these are not just fancy words, because the majority of them have visited Ukraine already. And I don't need to tell them, like Nancy Pelosi just explained what happens in Ukraine, because she was there. She saw it for herself. She was there when the enemy was almost near Kyiv. The majority of congressmen and congresswomen that I met were in Ukraine, and I don't need to tell them this story. They know it. More than 50 speakers and vice speakers have come to visit Ukraine after my invitation. I visited these places where the war is going on, and I've seen this in their eyes, and I think this honesty in the relationship brings about big support and the feeling that this pain is their pain as well. So I can surely say that the whole world understands that Ukraine is fighting not only for ourselves, not only for this freedom, we are fighting for the right of civilization to exist, or against the right of barbarians to destroy civilizations. These are systemic and visionary things. So in the example of Ukraine, we have to prove that the right for freedom, the right for civilization, the right for democracy will win the barbarianism, the arrogance and darkness, and attempt to bring us back to the 12th century. Because we live in the 21st century and want to walk together because we have the right to do so.
Madam Speaker, please.
What I wanted to, well, following up on what the distinguished speaker said now and just before your follow-up question, at a security breakfast this morning, a very experienced, talented, respected security leader said, in a war, you don't always win because of the things you can count unless you count on the spirit of the people. And that is what is so fabulous to observe when you talk about people not being tired or people getting fatigue or whatever it is that the outside people may have when the soldiers are fighting and their families are sacrificing and the rest. So that spirit is something that is just lifting everyone up. When you ask about other parliaments, well, this is the biggest delegation we have. The Prime Minister of the UK said today it's their biggest delegation, and that is really because of Ukraine. We thought we had the biggest delegation last year without Ukraine, but this far surpasses that. But did you hear, we were very proud to have President Zelensky come before Congress right before Christmas, and the response was just fabulous. Bipartisan, and prolonged, and fabulous. Then to see him at the Westminster Hall. Did you see that? Did you hear what the parliamentarians said before he spoke and after he spoke and the response that he received? There's almost nothing recent like it. And when I say recent, I mean decades. So I think if they were not making this fight, if the Ukrainians were not making this fight, where would we be with NATO? Forgetting, just putting NATO aside for a moment, what about the countries in the region, Moldova, other countries that do not have a Title V, Article 5 protection, and what that means for them? So we have a big debt of gratitude to the people of Ukraine, to the courage of their leadership, of the soldiers and the rest, and we're very proud of some Americans who've gone over to join the fight.
So thank you, Madam Speaker. I do want to open it up to questions from the audience. I see quite a few distinguished members of the audience here. If anybody wants to come in. Also online, if you're following the conversation, please feel free to send your questions over, and I'll try to work them in as well. Do I see a hand? Yes. Deputy Popescu, please.
As you pass the mic, I just want to observe that the Deputy Speaker of the Latvian Parliament is with us. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for a beautiful panel, Madam Speaker and Alina. I would like to raise a question, which I raised it many times today, because I know it's one part of the work that SIPA was doing on the Hill, and I want to thank you for that, Alina, for the efforts. We are talking about the Black Sea region, and I know that many congressmen and senators, and I want to thank also for that, focused and started to realize the importance of the Black Sea region. I want to ask you, Madam Speaker, according to the fact that you set up the base through the Congress of Omnibus legislation, and which talks about the Black Sea, if you believe that it's urgent to set up a strategy there in that region in order to help more Ukraine and countries like Moldova to insulate the whole region and secure the grain crossing and what will happen in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. I share the response that our distinguished Secretary of State made today. Yes, indeed, this is very important. It's not only important to Ukraine, I mean, of course it's important to Ukraine, but important to the region, but important to anyone who depends on food from Ukraine or other exports from Ukraine. So that I appreciate the knowledge that you have and the sensitivity on that subject, but you cannot have the total picture unless that would be included, in my view.
And Madam Speaker, can I just follow up on the Black Sea security question for a moment? I'm not going to cite some of the media coverage that's been happening the last several days. But do you think, and is it the sense of perhaps your colleagues, that Ukraine can be secure if Crimea remains somehow occupied by Russia?
Well, this is a very subjective question. Of course, it's all up to the Ukrainians. As far as I'm concerned, and many of my colleagues, we think Russia has to go. It's an embarrassment that they occupied Crimea without the appropriate reaction to it at the time. And maybe Jerry would like to respond to it as well, because he speaks not only as a member of the House, but as a former chair of the NATO interparliamentary group. But in my view,
no, I appreciate. Thank you for saying that on the record, Congressman Connolly.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Speaker. And I completely agree. I would 2 points. Russia needs to leave all Ukrainian sovereign territory. They must. Otherwise, even if we succeed in pushing them back in most occupied territory, they can use that as a platform in a few years to do it again. Secondly, I would also say none of us ought to be opining about what could be negotiated on behalf of Ukraine. It is up to Ukraine to decide what it is or is not willing to put on the table in negotiations. And when you're in the middle of a war, it is not a smart thing to be negotiating away somebody's territory. We saw that with Kissinger in Davos, and it was a remarkable moment. Like, I thought, well, who elected you to decide on behalf of the Ukrainian people as they're fighting and dying for their freedom and democracy, that somehow they need to wake up and start to put their sovereign territory on the table. So I agree completely with Speaker Pelosi. That's not our call, and this is not the time to be even talking about that while brave men and women are fighting and dying.
Thank you, Congressman, for that statement. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to come back to you in just a second, but I want to bring in Boris Ruga into the conversation. Ambassador Ruga, please.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Speaker Pelosi. It's a huge honor to have you back in Munich. When we were in Washington, D.C. in May of last year, you were kind enough to host us at Congress. And I think that really underlined the close relationship between the MSC and the United States Congress. And so welcome once again here. It's a real pleasure to see you on stage alongside Ruslana Stefanchuk. And I think that is very symbolic as well. I don't know whether you've touched on this already, because I'm running from one thing to another, but what I'd be interested in is the sort of connection between the US Congress and the Rada in Ukraine, and how that has worked during this conflict, and how it has been productive in addressing Russia's aggression. Perhaps you've dealt with that already. If not, I'd be very interested in your point of view.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Ruga. Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, well, let's just say that we've had sort of a constant communication between the Congress and the Speaker. I have had great conversations and communication, but he has had that across the aisle, across the Capitol, and the rest. But let me just tell you a few things. So he comes, he makes the pitch, the whole thing. We have a video from the president. Oh, that was a big deal. Packed and jammed, Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate. Then we have the First Lady. She came in person. Fabulous. That's the executive branch. But in terms of parliament to parliament, this is so important. And as I say, NATO and the interparliamentary group, parliament to parliament is so important, because that's where policy is made, that's where money is allocated, especially in the Constitution of the United States says that's the House of Representatives. But then we've met other places. We met in Berlin for the NATO meeting of speakers Stefanchuk came. It was just the NATO, but it wasn't NATO, it was the G7. It was the G7 in Berlin, which then led us to Croatia, where you had, what, 50 speakers, members of 55 representatives of parliament from all over the world, where we had shared our, shall we say, enthusiasms about all of this. So he has been masterful in recognizing the role of parliaments, and in terms of the U.S., and we've had so many phone calls, Zooms, and the rest. So there was never any doubt as to what their preferences and priorities are. And we feel very complimented to get the purpose. This is why we need this. This is when we need it. And I'll talk to anybody about it. Stefanchuk.
So, Mr. Speaker, please, we only have a few minutes. If there's any final question, I'll take it now, and then I want to give Speaker Stefanchuk the final closing. Yes, madam, please.
Hello, my name is Zanda Kalniņa Lukaševica. I'm Deputy Speaker of the Latvian Parliament. And thank you so much, Speaker Pelosi and Speaker Stefanchuk, for everything you said. And indeed, it's important for us to continue political, financial, military support to Ukraine as much as possible. But as we are approaching a symbolic milestone, the 24th of February, if I may, at the conclusion of this discussion, ask both of you a rather personal question. If you would compare how you personally felt like a day before the February 24th last year and how it is today. So knowing what's ahead and also seeing how the year has passed, if you could share with us, and maybe that could help to raise additional support internationally. Indeed, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, is there another question? I didn't see another question. Mr. Chairman, would you like to start? Please.
Thank you to Honorable Speaker Pelosi. I just want to say and remind that the 24th of February last year, the first call that I made was to Speaker Pelosi. And I'm grateful for the words that you told me then. You told me, stay strong, the United States are with you, we will support you. And throughout this year, you have never failed to do that. And thank you very much for this call. I called you from the bomb shelter, which was one of the buildings of the Parliament of Ukraine. I will remember that all my life. Your calm words, your honest and sincere words of support meant a lot to me. And since that time, we've passed this long way of joint cooperation. I think this was the basis of cooperation between our parliaments, and therefore I would like to thank you personally for your leadership in this process and for your visit to Ukraine and our constant meetings that have always been accompanied with the words of good support to Ukrainian people. I know this and I value very much. Regarding how we have changed throughout the year, I would like to say that we have become more realistic. We have passed lots of phases of our perception from optimism to pessimism. Now we are in realism. And we clearly understand what needs to be done to have this war ended with the victory of Ukraine. And the date, which will be golden date in the calendar of Ukraine, it depends on us. And this is the date of our joint victory. And it is now common possibility to do it as soon as possible. And I know that we have friends here that will do all it takes so that as soon as possible we would celebrate the big victory of good over evil. And also I would like to say a couple of words regarding the question. I forgot, sorry. But I'll end at this. So thank you to all of you. Thank you. Thank you for this.
The final word.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your kind words. Yes, when he called me that first time, he said, I can't talk too long because they're bombing or whatever. In any event, it was a sincere and honest relationship between the members of Congress and the Speaker and other members of Parliament who are here. But let me just say, when that day, to your question, Madam Speaker, on that day, we heard President Zelensky speak, and he challenged as I said earlier, he challenged the security structure of the free world. Why weren't we there? Would they be there, and all of that? He was just remarkable and so brave to just come out of Ukraine, come make that speech and leave. So we're overwhelmed by his bravery and hoping that, obviously, for the best, and how could, of course, we would be there for them. This was about sovereignty. It was about not respecting borders. It was more of a up here kind of thing. For a long time now, I've had a really difficult time trying to understand why the world is not up in arms about using women, rape of women, kidnapping of children as a weapon of war. I just have seen and heard so many stories. Many parliamentarians, grassroots activists, and the rest have come to visit us in the Capitol and bring these stories. And to think that that this outrage, I mean, it would take too long to go into all of raping people in front of their children or in front of their parents, dismembering them in front of their family. It's brutal. And when I said to a Russian expert, this war is turning these Russian soldiers into animals. It's just terrible. I guess that's what war does to you. They said, make no mistake. Those soldiers don't do anything they're not ordered to do. So this is the regime, the government is responsible for this. So in any event, it's now more of an emotional response of if only everybody was aware of it, how could they vote against a resolution criticizing, or more than that, the Russians at the United Nations? How could everybody not just say that this is behavior outside the circle of civilized human behavior? So more emotional, more sort of, not unemotional, but more, less emotional than now. And just want to close by praising our President, President Joe Biden. Try to do this briefly. When I was a student, I was at John Kennedy's inauguration. And everybody in the world, or all Americans, know that in that speech, he said to the citizens of America, ask not what you can do for what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Kids learn that in school. Everybody knows it, even if their parents weren't even born then. The next line, though, in the speech is what I remembered as a student. The next line, he said, to the citizens of the world, ask not what America can do for you, but what we can do working together for the freedom of mankind. And I believe that Joe Biden was having a Kennedy-esque time, era, moment, in the manner in which he worked with countries, not in condescension, not in saying this is how we would do it, but listening and building consensus among the NATO nations, and first and foremost, listening to the Ukrainians, working together for the freedom of mankind. That is what this is about, and that's why we're all so grateful to the Ukrainian people for fighting for the freedom of mankind there and in the world. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Madam Speaker. Thank you for your courage, for the courage of the Ukrainian people. I may mention to you, last word from me before we close out, that I'm from Ukraine originally. I grew up outside of Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States, and am now in Washington. But I was recently given a bracelet that I'm wearing all the time now from one of the members of your parliament, Alexei Koncharenko, who's also here at the Munich Security Conference. And it's made with the bullets that were used in the Battle of Kiev at the beginning of the war when we thought Kiev was going to fall. And I truly do wear it now to remind myself to not forget and to remember what you were talking about, Madam Speaker, the emotional side of this brutal, cruel war. Watching what has happened to my hometown in Kiev has been really difficult, even as we all try to compartmentalize so that we don't have emotional breakdowns every day. And I think the courage of the Ukrainian people and their steadfast commitment to victory is what carries all of us through our day-to-day lives. But it's a good reminder, and I appreciate you saying that. And you have the same one. So Alexei has gone to you too.
Close to our hearts.
Very good.
Close to our hearts. Yeah.
Thank you for wearing it. And thank you everyone for being part of this conversation. Thank you, Congressman Connolly, for all of your work in the U.S. Congress to support Ukraine. And I think many of you probably have dinners, so thank you. Please join me in a final round of applause.